The bullet that whizzed past Grant Brennan's head was close enough that he could feel the air split apart. And in that moment, as he threw himself behind the water trough outside the Wallace, Idaho saloon, he realized he was going to die without ever telling Madeline Grayson that he loved her. It was the summer of 1881, and Wallace was a mining town that had sprung up in the Silver Valley like a mushroom after rain. All rough timber buildings and rutted streets that turned to soup when it rained and concrete dust when it did not. Grant had been working on the Grayson Ranch for 3 years now, ever since he had drifted into town at 20 years old with nothing but a horse, a saddle, and the clothes on his back. The ranch sat 5 miles outside of town, nestled in a valley where the grass grew thick and green despite the Idaho heat, fed by a creek that ran down from the mountains year-round. It was good land, and Thomas Grayson had built something impressive there, running cattle and horses both, supplying the miners with beef and the mining companies with strong animals to haul their equipment. Grant had been hired on as just another ranch hand, the lowest position available, mucking stables and mending fences while the more experienced cowboys handled the cattle drives and horse breaking. But he had worked hard, kept his head down, and learned everything he could. By now, at 23, he was one of Thomas's most trusted hands, someone who could break a green horse without breaking its spirit, who could read weather in the mountains and find strays in terrain that would lose most men. The gunfire had nothing to do with him, not really. 2 drunken miners had gotten into a dispute over a card game, and when one had drawn his weapon, the other had followed suit. Grant had just been in the wrong place, walking out of the saloon after delivering a message for Thomas to the town's feed supplier. Now he was crouched behind a water trough while bullets flew, waiting for the sheriff to arrive and put an end to the nonsense. But all he could think about was Madeline. She had arrived at the ranch 6 months ago, Thomas's younger sister, coming west from Philadelphia after their mother had passed. Grant had been working in the corral when the stagecoach had pulled up to the main house, and he had watched her step down, all dark curls and green eyes and a fitted traveling dress that spoke of a world he had never known. She was 21 years old, educated, cultured, everything he was not. Thomas had introduced her to the ranch hands that evening at dinner, and Grant had barely been able to speak, just nodded when she said hello, and then sat at the far end of the table, acutely aware of the dirt under his fingernails despite having scrubbed them raw. The sheriff's voice boomed out and the shooting stopped. Grant waited a moment longer, then straightened up, dusting off his trousers. His heart was pounding, but not from the danger. He had made a decision in those few seconds behind the water trough. He was going to tell Madeline how he felt. He was going to prove to her, and to Thomas and to himself, that he was good enough for her. The ride back to the ranch took just under an hour, and Grant used the time to rehearse what he might say, though every version sounded foolish in his head. How did a man tell a woman like Madeline Grayson that he loved her? She probably had suitors back east, educated men with money and prospects. What could he offer her? A bunk in the ranch hand quarters and a life of hard work, but he had to try. The ranch house came into view as he crested the final hill, a sturdy 2-story structure built from local timber, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn and outbuildings sprawled behind it, and beyond that, the pastures stretched toward the mountains, dotted with cattle. It was beautiful land, and Grant had come to love it in his years here, love the smell of pine and grass, the sound of the creek, the way the mountains turned purple in the evening light. He stabled his horse and made his way toward the main house to report to Thomas, but stopped when he saw Madeline on the porch. She was sitting in one of the rocking chairs, a book in her lap, though she was not reading. Instead, she was looking out at the mountains, her expression distant. Grant's courage nearly failed him, but he forced his feet to move, climbing the porch steps. She looked up at his approach, and a smile crossed her face that made his heart stutter. "Grant," she said, "you are back from town. Was your errand successful?" "Yes, madam," he said, then cursed himself for the formality. "I mean yes, the feed supplier will have the order ready by Thursday. That is good news." She set her book aside, and he noticed it was a novel, something with a fancy embossed cover. "You look troubled. Did something happen in town?" He had not meant to tell her about the shooting, but the words came out anyway, and her eyes widened. "You could have been killed," she said, standing up quickly. "Are you all right? Were you hurt?" "No, madam, I am fine. Just got my thoughts rattled a bit." She moved closer, and he caught the scent of lavender, some soap or perfume she used. It made him dizzy. "When something like that happens," she said softly, "it makes you realize how precious life is, does it not? How we should not waste time." He looked into her green eyes and saw something there, some emotion he could not quite name. Hope flared in his chest. "Miss Grayson," he started, but the front door opened and Thomas stepped out. "Brennan," Thomas said, nodding. "You are back. Good. I need to speak with you about the cattle drive next week." He glanced at his sister. "Madeline, you should come inside. The evening air is getting cold." "I am fine, Thomas," she said, but there was a note of frustration in her voice. "Inside," Thomas repeated, and though his tone was mild, there was steel underneath it. Madeline's jaw tightened, but she picked up her book and went into the house without another word. Thomas watched her go, then turned to Grant. "Walk with me," he said. They went down the porch steps and toward the corral, where several horses stood dozing in the last of the daylight. Thomas leaned against the fence, quiet for a long moment. "You are a good man, Brennan," he finally said. "One of the best hands I have ever had. You work hard, you are honest, and the men respect you." "Thank you, sir. But I have seen the way you look at my sister." Grant's stomach dropped. He considered denying it, but Thomas was not a fool. "I respect her, sir," Grant said carefully. "I know you do. That is not what concerns me." Thomas sighed, rubbing his face. "Madeline is all the family I have left. Our father died when she was young, our mother just this year. I brought her out here to give her a fresh start, somewhere safe. She has been through a lot. I understand. Do you?" Thomas turned to look at him fully. "She is educated, refined. She has prospects, Grant, men back east who could give her a life of comfort." "Then why did she come here?" Grant asked before he could stop himself. Thomas's expression flickered. "That is complicated." They stood in silence for a moment. A cow lowed in the distance, and somewhere a horse whinnied. "I am not trying to be cruel," Thomas said finally, "but I need you to understand the reality of the situation. You are a ranch hand. You have no property, no savings to speak of. How would you support her? Where would you even live?" Each word was a blow, but Grant forced himself to stand straight. "I know I am not much now, sir, but I am a hard worker. I could save money, find a way to start something of my own. I could prove myself." "Maybe," Thomas said, though he did not sound convinced. "But in the meantime, I need to know that you will not do anything to compromise my sister's reputation or her future. She deserves better than stolen moments and broken promises." The accusation stung, but Grant swallowed his pride. "I would never dishonor her, sir. I swear it." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "See that you do not. Now, about the cattle drive. I need you to lead it this year. We are taking 500 head to the rail station in Missoula. It is a hard 2-week journey there and back. Can you handle it?" The abrupt change of subject threw Grant, but he nodded. "Yes, sir. Good. Take Mac and the Rodriguez brothers with you. Leave Monday morning." Thomas pushed off from the fence. "And Brennan, use the time away to think about what I have said. Really think about it." Grant watched him walk back to the house, feeling like his world had tilted on its axis. But beneath the disappointment and frustration, determination was building. Thomas had not said it was impossible. He had just said Grant was not enough, not yet. Which meant there was a path forward if Grant could find it. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. Grant worked from before dawn until after dark, selecting the cattle for the drive, checking tack and supplies, planning the route. He barely saw Madeline, and when he did, it was only in passing. She would smile at him, sometimes open her mouth as if to speak, but Thomas was always nearby, and the moment would pass. Sunday evening, Grant was in the barn checking the pack horses one final time when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Madeline standing in the doorway, silhouetted against the fading light. "Miss Grayson," he said, surprised, "you should not be out here alone." "Why not? It is our barn." She stepped inside, looking around at the neat rows of stalls, the tack hanging on the walls. "I wanted to see you before you left tomorrow." His heart began to pound. "Is something wrong?" "No, yes, I do not know." She moved closer, and in the dim light of the barn her eyes looked almost black. "Thomas told me he spoke to you about us." "There is no us, Miss Grayson. Is there not?" She was close enough now that he could have reached out and touched her. "Then why do you look at me the way you do? Why do I find myself watching for you every morning, listening for your voice?" Grant's throat went dry. "Your brother is right. I have nothing to offer you." "Did I ask you to offer me anything?" There was frustration in her voice now, and fire. "I am so tired of men telling me what I need, what I deserve. Thomas brought me here to get me away from Philadelphia, away from a man he thought was wrong for me. Robert Harrington, a banker's son. Rich, educated, everything proper. And Thomas was right. Robert was wrong for me, but not because of money or breeding. He was wrong because he did not love me, not really. He loved the idea of me, the way I looked on his arm. He never once asked me what I wanted, what I dreamed about." "What do you want?" Grant asked softly, "to make my own choices." She lifted her chin. "To not be treated like a porcelain doll that might break. I came west for freedom, but Thomas just built a different kind of cage. He is trying to protect you, I know, and I love him for it. But Grant, I am not a child." She paused, then added quietly, "And I am not blind. I see how hard you work. I see how the other men look up to you, how you are kind to the horses, how you fix things instead of just throwing them away. I see you." The words broke something open in his chest. Without thinking, he reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were small in his rough palm, but they gripped him tightly. "I am going to prove myself," he said. "To you, to Thomas, to everyone. I do not know how yet, but I will find a way. I will become someone worthy of you." "You already are," she whispered. He wanted to kiss her so badly it hurt, but he could not. Not here, not now, not without dishonoring her the way Thomas feared. So instead, he lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Wait for me," he said. "When I come back from this drive, things will be different. I will make them different," she nodded, tears shining in her eyes. "Be safe." Then she slipped away into the gathering darkness, leaving him alone with his pounding heart and a determination that felt like iron in his blood. The cattle drive began at first light Monday morning. Grant and the other 3 men rode out with the herd, 500 head of prime beef cattle that would fetch good prices at the rail station in Missoula, Montana. It was a journey Grant had made twice before as one of the hands, but never as trail boss. The responsibility weighed on him, but it also felt right, like a coat that finally fit properly. Mac was the oldest of the group at 45, a weathered man with a gray beard and eyes that squinted permanently from years in the sun. The Rodriguez brothers, Carlos and Manuel, were in their late 20s, skilled riders who had grown up on ranches in Southern California before drifting north. They were good men, all of them, and they worked well together. The first few days passed without incident. They covered about 15 miles a day, keeping the cattle moving at a steady pace, stopping to let them graze and water at creeks and rivers. At night, they took turns on watch, keeping the herd calm and together. Grant used the quiet night hours to plan. Thomas had been right about one thing. Grant had no property, no real savings. His wages were decent, but after paying for his basic needs, there was not much left over. If he wanted to build something, to have something to offer Madeline, he needed to change that. But how? He could not simply ask for higher wages. That was not how it worked. The idea came to him on the 5th night as he sat by the fire while the others slept. Land. That was the key. If he could get land, he could start his own small ranch, build something from the ground up. It would take years, but it was possible. The Homestead Act was still in effect, offering 160 acres to anyone willing to work the land for 5 years. Grant had always dismissed it before, knowing he could not work someone else's ranch and his own at the same time. But maybe there was another way. He would need to talk to Thomas when he got back. Maybe they could work out some kind of arrangement where Grant could take a small herd on shares, build his own stock while still working the Grayson ranch. It was not unheard of. Some ranch owners did it as a way to reward loyal hands and keep them from drifting on. The more he thought about it, the more possible it seemed. He would need Thomas's blessing, his help even, which meant proving himself even more than he already had. This cattle drive was part of that. If he could bring the herd in safely, get top dollar for them, show that he could handle responsibility, maybe Thomas would listen. On the 8th day, they crossed into Montana, following the trail that wound through the mountains. The terrain was rougher here, and they had to move more carefully, making sure the cattle did not slip on the rocky paths or bolt down dangerous slopes. It was exhausting work, and they were all feeling it, but they were making good time. They were 2 days from Missoula when things went wrong. It started with a smell on the wind, acrid and wrong. Grant noticed it first, sitting up straighter in his saddle and scanning the horizon. The others caught it too, and Mac rode up beside him. "Smoke," Mac said grimly. They crested the next rise and saw it. Below them, in the valley they had been planning to camp in that night, a wildfire was burning. It was not massive yet, but it was growing, fed by the dry summer grass and pushed by the wind. And between them and the fire in the valley was a ranch. "Someone lives down there," Carlos said, riding up on Grant's other side. Through his spyglass, Grant could see figures moving near the ranch buildings, trying to fight the fire with buckets and wet blankets. It was futile. The fire was moving too fast. "We have to help them," Manuel said. Grant looked at the cattle, then at the fire, calculating. If they went down there, they would lose time, might even lose some of the herd if the cattle spooked. But if they did not go down there, people might die. There was really no choice. "Mac, you and Manuel keep the herd here away from the smoke. Do not let them scatter. Carlos, you are with me." They rode hard down into the valley, pushing their horses to the limit. As they got closer, Grant could see the situation was worse than he had thought. The main ranch house was not in immediate danger yet, but the barn was already burning and the fire was spreading toward the house. There were 4 people fighting it, a man, a woman, and 2 children, and they were losing. Grant and Carlos did not waste time on introductions. They jumped into the effort, helping the family create a fire break between the barn and the house, using shovels to dig a trench in the dirt, hauling water from the well to soak the ground. The heat was tremendous, and smoke burned Grant's eyes and throat, but he kept working. The barn was lost, but they managed to save the house and the other outbuildings. By the time the fire burned itself out against the creek on the far side of the property, They were all black with soot and exhausted. The rancher was a man named William Porter, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to see. "You saved our lives," he said, gripping Grant's hand. "That fire would have taken the house and us with it. I do not know how to thank you." "No thanks needed," Grant said. "Any man would have done the same." "Not any man," William said. "Plenty would have ridden on by, worried about their own business. You did not." Grant and Carlos stayed the night, helping the Porters sort through the damage and make plans for rebuilding. The next morning, as they prepared to leave, William pulled Grant aside. "I meant what I said about thanking you," he said. "And I am a man who pays his debts. I heard you talking last night with your man about trying to start your own ranch someday. I have a proposition for you." Grant listened, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. William had a large ranch, over 1,000 acres, but his health was not good, and he was thinking about the future. He had been wanting to find a partner, someone younger and strong who could help run things and eventually take over when William could not do it anymore. He had sons, but they had gone east for education and showed no interest in ranching. "I am not offering you the whole thing," William said carefully. "But if you were willing to work here, help me rebuild and run the place, I would give you a percentage of the profits and a stake in the land. After 5 years, if we both agree it is working, you could buy in as a full partner. I would keep enough to live on and the rest would be yours." It was more than Grant had dreamed possible, a real opportunity, a path to having something of his own, but there was a problem. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Porter, more than I can say, but I already have obligations. I work for Thomas Grayson in Idaho, and I am currently bringing his cattle to Missoula. I cannot just abandon that." "I am not asking you to," William said. "Finish your drive, go back to Idaho, talk to your boss. If he is a reasonable man, he will understand. And if you decide you want to take me up on this, you know where to find me." Grant shook his hand, feeling like the world had shifted again. He and Carlos rode back up to where Mac and Manuel waited with the herd, and they continued on to Missoula. Grant's mind was spinning the whole way, running through possibilities and problems. William's offer was incredible, but it would mean leaving the Grayson Ranch, leaving Idaho, leaving Madeline, unless she came with him. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at once. Could he ask her that? Could he ask her to leave her brother, the only family she had, to come to Montana with him and help build a new life? Would Thomas ever agree? They reached Missoula 3 days later and sold the cattle for even more than Thomas had hoped. The cattle broker was impressed with the condition of the herd, how well they had been handled on the trail, and he paid top dollar. Grant made sure to get the payment in a secure bank draft, then sent a telegram to Thomas informing him of their success. The return journey to Idaho gave Grant more time to think, but by the time they reached the Grayson Ranch 2 weeks later, he had made his decision. He would tell Thomas about William's offer. He would explain that he wanted to take it, but only if he could court Madeline properly and ask for her hand. He would prove that he was serious, that he had a real future to offer her. It was late afternoon when they rode into the ranch yard. Grant had barely dismounted when Madeline came running out of the house, her skirts flying. She stopped short when she reached him, suddenly aware of the other men watching, and her cheeks flushed. "You are back," she said breathlessly. "We received your telegram. Thomas said you did wonderfully." "Just did the job, madam," Grant said, but he was smiling. God, he had missed her face. Thomas appeared on the porch, and Grant could see the approval in his expression. "Brennan, good work. Come inside and give me the full report." Grant followed him into the house, into the office where Thomas conducted ranch business. He gave a thorough accounting of the drive, the sale, everything. Thomas listened, nodding, clearly pleased. "You have earned a bonus for this," Thomas said, and I am promoting you to foreman. The previous one is retiring next month, and you have proven you can handle the responsibility." It was exactly what Grant would have wanted a week ago. Now it felt like a complication. "I appreciate that, sir, truly, but I need to talk to you about something else." He told Thomas about the fire, about William Porter, about the offer. Thomas's expression grew darker as Grant spoke. "So you are leaving," Thomas said flatly when Grant finished. "I do not want to leave you in a bind, sir. I will stay as long as you need to find and train a replacement. But yes, I am considering taking Mr. Porter's offer. It is a chance to have my own place to build something. And my sister, does she figure into these plans?" Grant met his eyes steadily. "I want to court her properly with your permission. I know I am not what you imagined for her, but now I have real prospects. A future. I could provide for her, give her a good life. In Montana, away from me." "I know that is hard," Grant said quietly. "But sir, with respect, she is a grown woman. She should have the choice." Thomas stood up and paced to the window, looking out at the ranch he had built. When he spoke, his voice was heavy. "After our father died, I raised Madeline. I was only 16 myself, but I did my best. I worked 3 jobs to keep us fed and clothed, to make sure she got an education. When our mother's health began to fail, I brought them both out here, bought this ranch, tried to make a good life for us. And when Mother died, all I wanted was to keep Madeline safe, to make sure she had everything she needed." He turned back to Grant. "You are asking me to let her go? To trust that you, a man I have known for 3 years, will take care of her the way I have? I know it is a lot to ask, but I love her, sir, and I think she loves me too. I would spend every day of my life making sure she was happy." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he sighed. "My sister is not a woman who can be kept, I have realized. She is too strong, too stubborn. If I say no, she will likely defy me, and I will lose her anyway." He looked at Grant. "So I will make you a deal. You may court her properly while you continue to work here. If after 3 months you both still feel the same way, and if you have proven to me beyond any doubt that you can provide for her, I will give you my blessing." 3 months. It felt like an eternity and no time at all. "Thank you, sir," Grant said. "I will prove myself. I swear it." "See that you do." Grant left the office feeling like he was walking on air. He went to find Madeline and found her in the kitchen, helping the cook prepare dinner. When she saw his face, her own lit up. "What happened?" she asked. "Can you step outside for a moment?" They went out to the back porch, away from curious eyes. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I spoke to your brother," Grant said, taking her hands. "He has given me permission to court you." Her eyes widened. "He has, for 3 months. And if, at the end of that time, we still want to be together, he will give us his blessing." She threw her arms around his neck, and he caught her, holding her close. She smelled like cinnamon and sunshine. "I cannot believe it," she whispered against his neck. "I was so afraid he would never agree. There is something else." He pulled back enough to look at her face. "I have an opportunity to become a partner in a ranch in Montana. It is a good opportunity, a chance to have something of our own. But it would mean leaving here, leaving Idaho." Her expression grew serious. "Tell me everything." They sat on the porch steps, and he told her about William Porter, about the offer, about what it could mean for their future. She listened carefully, asking questions, thinking it through. "It sounds like a wonderful opportunity," she said finally. "And Montana is not so far. We could visit Thomas and he could visit us. You would be willing to go, to leave your brother, to start over in a new place." She smiled, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "I did not come west to stay in my brother's shadow, Grant. I came to find my own life, and I want that life to be with you." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, a promise of things to come. When they pulled apart, she was blushing and smiling, and he felt like the luckiest man alive. The next 3 months were the best of Grant's life. He and Madeline spent every moment they could together, always properly chaperoned or in view of others, as was fitting. But they talked for hours, about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Philadelphia, about her love of books and learning, about her dreams of seeing more of the world. He told her about his childhood, about drifting from ranch to ranch before finding a home at the Grayson place, about his love of the land and animals. They discovered they both loved the mountains, both wanted children someday, both believed in hard work and honesty. They had different backgrounds, different educations, but their values aligned in the ways that mattered. Thomas watched them carefully, and Grant knew he was being tested every day. So he worked harder than ever, managing the ranch hands, planning improvements, showing Thomas that he could handle responsibility. He also saved every penny of his wages and his bonus, building a small nest egg that he could use to start his life with Madeline. In the evenings, when work was done, Grant would teach Madeline to ride better. She had known the basics before, but he showed her how to really work with a horse, how to read their moods and movements. In turn, she taught him to read better, lending him books and helping him improve his writing. She never made him feel stupid for his lack of formal education, only encouraged and praised his efforts. As the weeks passed, Grant saw Thomas's attitude slowly shift. The suspicion and protectiveness were still there, but they were joined by a grudging respect. Thomas could see that Grant's feelings were genuine, that this was not some passing fancy or attempt to take advantage. And he could see that Madeline was happier than she had been since arriving in Idaho, laughing more, smiling constantly. At the end of 2 months, Grant sent a letter to William Porter, telling him that he wanted to accept the offer and asking if it was still available. He also explained his situation, about Madeline and Thomas's conditions. A week later, a reply came. William was pleased to hear from him and said the offer still stood. Moreover, if Grant was bringing a wife, William's own wife would be delighted. She had been lonely with only her husband and hired hands for company. Everything was falling into place, but Grant did not let himself relax. He continued to work hard to court Madeline properly, to prove himself to Thomas day after day. Then, with just 2 weeks left before the 3-month deadline, disaster struck. It was a Tuesday morning, and Grant was working with a young stallion in the corral, trying to get the horse comfortable with a saddle. The stallion was nervous but responding well to Grant's patient approach. Several of the other hands were watching, including a newer hire named Jack who had only been on the ranch for a month. What happened next was a blur. One moment the stallion was calm, the next it was bucking and screaming, lashing out with its hooves. Later, they would discover that Jack had thrown a rock to see the horse's reaction, thinking it was funny. In the moment, all Grant knew was that he had a panicked half-ton animal in an enclosed space, and people were in danger. He managed to get the stallion calmed down before anyone was badly hurt, but not before the horse had kicked down part of the corral fence and trampled through a section of newly planted vegetable garden that Madeline had been cultivating. The damage could have been much worse, but Thomas was furious. "What the hell happened?" he demanded, striding over from the barn. "The horse spooked, sir," Grant said. He had already figured out it was Jack's fault, but he had not decided how to handle it. Jack was young, only 19, and had not meant any real harm. He had just been stupid. Spooked. A horse you were working does not just spook for no reason. Were you being careless? No, sir. Then what happened? Grant hesitated. If he blamed Jack, the kid would be fired and possibly blacklisted from other ranches in the area. But if he took the blame himself, Thomas might decide he was not responsible enough to marry Madeline. Before he could answer, Jack stepped forward. The young man was pale, but he met Thomas's eyes. "It was my fault, sir," Jack said. "I threw a rock. I did not think it would cause such a problem. I am sorry." Thomas's expression went cold. "Get your things. You are fired. I will not have someone on my ranch who endangers animals and people with their stupidity." Jack nodded, miserable, and went to collect his belongings. Thomas turned to Grant. "You knew it was him, did you not?" "I suspected, sir. But you were not going to say anything." Grant chose his words carefully. "He is young and made a mistake. I was trying to decide the best way to handle it, by protecting him. By possibly taking the blame yourself." Thomas shook his head. "That is foolish, Brennan. Noble, maybe, but foolish. Perhaps. But I remember being young and stupid too. Someone gave me a chance once when they did not have to. That is why I am standing here now." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then his expression softened slightly. "You have a good heart. That is not always a strength in this world." "Maybe not," Grant agreed, "but it is the only way I know to be." Later that evening, Madeline found Grant repairing the damaged corral fence. She handed him a cup of water and sat on the fence rail, watching him work. "Thomas told me what happened," she said. "With the horse and with Jack. Did he tell you I nearly lied to protect that fool kid?" "He told me you showed mercy," she smiled. "I am not surprised. You are a good man, Grant Brennan. Your brother does not think so." "Yes, he does." She hopped down from the fence and moved closer. "He told me just now that he has made his decision. He is giving us his blessing." Grant's hands stilled on the fence post. "What?" "The 3 months are not quite up, but he said he has seen enough. He knows you will take care of me, that you are a man of honor." Her eyes were shining with tears. "Grant, we can get married." He dropped the hammer and pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. She laughed, and the sound was pure joy. "Marry me," he said, setting her down but keeping his hands on her waist. "Officially. Madeline Grayson, will you be my wife?" "Yes," she said, and kissed him. They were married a month later in the small church in Wallace. It was a simple ceremony, attended by the ranch hands, a few townspeople, and Thomas. Madeline wore a dress of pale blue silk that she had ordered from a catalog, and Grant wore a new suit that Thomas had helped him buy. He felt uncomfortable in the formal clothes, but the way Madeline looked at him made it worthwhile. Thomas walked his sister down the aisle, and Grant saw tears in the older man's eyes when he placed Madeline's hand in Grant's. Whatever reservations Thomas had once had, they seemed to have faded. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas was the first to congratulate them. "Take care of her," he said to Grant, gripping his hand. "I will, sir, I promise." "And you," Thomas said to Madeline, hugging her tightly, "be happy. That is all I have ever wanted for you." "I will be," she said, crying against his shoulder. "And you must promise to visit us in Montana. Often." "I promise." They spent their first night as husband and wife at the hotel in Wallace in the finest room available. It was not much compared to what Madeline had known in Philadelphia, but she did not seem to care. She was happy, and that was all that mattered to Grant. The next day, they began their journey to Montana. Thomas had given them a wagon loaded with supplies and furniture as a wedding gift, along with 2 good horses and a milk cow. It was generous beyond measure, and Grant promised himself he would find a way to repay Thomas's kindness someday. The journey took 5 days, following the trails Grant had learned during the cattle drive. Madeline proved to be a good traveler, not complaining about the long days or the uncomfortable sleeping arrangements. At night, they would make camp and sit by the fire, talking about their plans for the future, for the ranch they would build together. When they finally arrived at the Porter Ranch, William and his wife Sarah welcomed them like family. Sarah, a plump woman in her 50s with a warm smile, immediately took Madeline under her wing, showing her around the ranch and the house. "It will be so nice to have another woman here," Sarah said. "I have been outnumbered by men for too long." Grant and William got to work immediately, assessing the damage from the fire and making plans for rebuilding. The barn needed to be completely reconstructed, and there were fences to repair and cattle to round up. It was daunting, but Grant had never been afraid of hard work. In those first months, Grant and Madeline settled into their new life. They had a small cabin on the property, just 2 rooms, but Madeline made it into a home with curtains and rugs and little touches that made it feel cozy. She learned to cook on the wood stove, to make soap and candles, to tend a garden. Grant worked from dawn until dark, helping William run the ranch, learning every aspect of the business. It was not always easy. There were days when Grant was so exhausted he could barely stand, when Madeline was so homesick for her brother that she cried. But they faced it together, supporting each other, and slowly the ranch began to thrive again. The new barn went up in the spring, a massive structure built to last. Grant hired on 2 more hands, men he had worked with before who were willing to relocate for steady work. They brought in new cattle, bred the horses, planted crops. By the end of their first year, the ranch was profitable again, and William was openly saying that Grant was the best decision he had ever made. And through it all, Grant and Madeline's love grew deeper. They learned each other's rhythms and moods, learned when to push and when to give space, learned that being married was both harder and more wonderful than either of them had imagined. In the second year, Madeline became pregnant. Grant was terrified and thrilled in equal measure, hovering over her until she laughingly told him to stop treating her like she was made of glass. Sarah helped her through the pregnancy, teaching her what to expect and sharing her own experiences. Their son was born on a cold November morning, entering the world with a lusty cry that made Grant laugh with relief. They named him Thomas after Madeline's brother, and when Grant sent a telegram with the news, Thomas's reply was simple but heartfelt. "Congratulations. We'll visit in spring." True to his word, Thomas arrived in April with a wagon full of gifts for his nephew. He stayed for 2 weeks, and Grant could see how much it meant to Madeline to have her brother there, to show him her life and have him approve of it. Thomas and Grant spent long hours talking about ranching, about the future, about family. By the time Thomas left, any last remnants of distance between them had vanished. They were not just connected by Madeline anymore. They were friends. The years rolled on, full and rich. When Thomas was 3, Madeline gave birth to twin girls, Emma and Grace, who filled the cabin with chaos and laughter. Grant built an addition onto the cabin to make more room, and then, when William's health began to truly fail, they moved into the main ranch house so Sarah would not be alone. William passed away peacefully in his sleep when Grant was 30, leaving the ranch to Grant exactly as he had promised. Sarah stayed on, now more grandmother than anything else, doting on the children and helping Madeline run the household. Grant hired more men as the ranch grew, and began mentoring young hands the way he wished someone had mentored him, teaching them not just skills but values. Several of them went on to start their own places, and Grant was proud to have helped them get there. Thomas visited twice a year, always bearing gifts and stories. He never remarried after his wife passed away when Grant was 32, but he seemed content, throwing himself into his own ranch and his role as uncle. When Grant was 35, Madeline gave birth to their 4th child, another son they named William in honor of the man who had given them their start. By then, their ranch was one of the most successful in the region, known for quality horses and cattle, and for fair dealing. But for all the success, all the growth and prosperity, What Grant treasured most were the quiet moments. Sitting on the porch with Madeline in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, teaching his sons to ride and his daughters to rope, reading books aloud by the fire in winter. The feeling of Madeline's hand in his, still able to make his heart race after all these years. One evening, when they had been married 15 years, Madeline found him in the barn, checking on a mare about to foal. She slipped her arms around him from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Do you remember when we first met?" she asked. "Of course. You stepped off that stagecoach looking like you had landed on another planet." She laughed. "I felt that way. Everything was so different from Philadelphia. Rougher, wilder. Do you regret it? Coming west, marrying a ranch hand?" She turned him to face her, and in the lamplight her eyes were as green and bright as they had been that first day. "Not for one single moment," she said. "You gave me everything I was looking for, Grant. Adventure, freedom, love, a life that is real and meaningful. How could I possibly regret that?" He kissed her, long and deep, pouring everything he felt into it. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I was so sure I was not good enough for you," he said quietly. "That day when I decided to prove myself, I had no idea if I could actually do it. I just knew I had to try." "You were always good enough," she said. "You just needed to believe it yourself. I believe it now, because of you." They stood there together in the peaceful barn, the smell of hay and horses all around them, and Grant felt a contentment so deep it was almost painful. This was what he had worked for, what he had fought for. Not just the ranch or the money or the respect, though those things were nice. But this feeling of being exactly where he was meant to be, with exactly the person he was meant to be with. When Grant was 45 years old, he and Madeline celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together everyone who mattered in their lives. Thomas came, now gray-haired but still strong. The ranch hands past and present came. Neighbors from miles around came. And their 4 children, now ranging from 18 to 10 years old, helped host, welcoming guests and making sure everyone had food and drink. Young Thomas had grown into a fine man, already being courted by William's daughter Rebecca. Emma and Grace, at 17, were clever and bold, already making noises about going to college, something Madeline wholeheartedly supported. And little William, only 10, was a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as horses. As Grant looked around at the crowded ranch yard, at the life he and Madeline had built, he felt overwhelmed with gratitude. He had come so far from that young ranch hand who thought he had nothing to offer. He had proven himself, yes, but more than that, he had learned what really mattered. Late in the evening, when most of the guests had left and the children were cleaning up, Grant and Madeline slipped away to their favorite spot, a small hill overlooking the ranch buildings and pastures. They sat together on the grass, her head on his shoulder, watching the stars come out. 20 years, Madeline said softly. "Where did the time go?" "Into this," Grant said, gesturing at the ranch below. "Into them." He nodded toward the house where their children were. "Into us." "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Thomas had not given us his blessing? If we had not been able to marry?" "Sometimes," Grant admitted. "But I think we would have found a way. We were meant to be together." "Yes," she agreed. "We were." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through grass. "I love you," Grant said. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you step off that stagecoach. I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Madeline said. "My ranch hand cowboy who was always good enough, even when he did not know it." They stayed there until the moon was high, 2 people who had taken different paths to find each other, who had built something beautiful together against the odds. And as they finally walked back to the house hand in hand, Grant knew that every challenge, every doubt, every moment of fear had been worth it for her, for the life they had created together. The years continued to roll by with the steady rhythm of ranch life. Young Thomas married Rebecca Porter in a ceremony that joined the two families even more closely, and they moved into a house on the far end of the property, beginning to take on more responsibility for running the ranch. Emma defied expectations and went east to attend college, while Grace stayed home, discovering a talent for training horses that rivaled her father's. William, true to his bookish nature, became fascinated with the business side of ranching, learning to manage accounts and contracts with a precision that made Grant shake his head in wonder. Where his other children had inherited his skill with animals or Madeline's determination, William had somehow gotten both, plus a head for numbers that neither parent possessed. Grant's hair began to gray at the temples, then turned fully silver. Madeline developed fine lines around her eyes from years of squinting in the bright Montana sun, but to Grant, she only grew more beautiful. They moved slower now, worked a bit less hard, but they were still vital parts of the ranch's operation, still making decisions and guiding the younger generation. Thomas Grayson visited faithfully until he was well into his 70s, finally making the decision to sell his Idaho ranch and move to Montana permanently. He bought a small house in the nearest town and became a fixture at family dinners, the beloved uncle who spoiled his great nieces and nephews and told stories of the old days. On Grant's 50th birthday, the family threw him a surprise party. He pretended to be shocked, though Madeline's terrible lying in the days leading up to it had made it fairly obvious something was happening. But his surprise was genuine when young Thomas stood up and made a speech, thanking Grant for everything he had taught him, for being not just a father but a mentor and friend. "You took a chance on love when everyone said you should not," Thomas said, his voice thick with emotion. "You proved yourself when you had every reason to give up, and you built all of this, not just with your hands but with your heart. You taught us that where you come from does not matter as much as where you are going and who you bring with you on the journey. I am proud to be your son." Grant had to wipe his eyes, and he was not the only one. Madeline was crying openly, and even old Thomas looked suspiciously damp around the eyes. Later, when the party had wound down and they were alone, Madeline took Grant's hand and led him out to the porch. The night was clear and cool, perfect Montana summer weather. 50 years old," she said. "You are getting ancient, Cowboy," says the woman who is not far behind me. "True enough." She leaned against him and he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "But we are aging well, I think. Look at what we have. 4 wonderful children, grandchildren, a ranch that thrives, friends, family, love." "More than I ever dreamed possible," Grant agreed. "You know, I still think about that day sometimes. When I was hiding behind that water trough in Wallace, bullets flying, and all I could think was that I was going to die without telling you I loved you. I am glad you did not die." "Me too." He kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made, proving I was good enough for you." "Second best," she corrected. "Oh, the best decision was not giving up, not walking away when things got hard, when Thomas said no when it seemed impossible. You could have drifted on to the next ranch, the next town, but you stayed. You fought for us. You were worth fighting for." They stood there together, 2 people who had been young once, who had taken a chance on love despite all the reasons not to. And as Grant looked out at the ranch they had built, at the legacy they were leaving for their children and grandchildren, he knew that every moment of struggle had been worth it. Life continued its steady march. Emma returned from college with a degree and a husband, a doctor who she had met at school. They settled in the nearby town, where he opened a practice, and Emma started a school for ranch children, combining her love of learning with her love of the West. Grace married one of the ranch hands, a quiet man who loved her fiercely and shared her gift with horses. They took over the horse breeding program, developing a reputation for quality that stretched across several states. William, at 21, surprised everyone by falling in love with a Native American woman named Sarah from the nearby reservation. There were some who disapproved, but Grant and Madeline welcomed her warmly, having learned long ago that love was what mattered, not convention. William and Sarah worked together to build trading relationships between the ranch and the reservation, creating economic opportunities that benefited everyone. The grandchildren came, 8 in total, filling the ranch with noise and laughter and occasional chaos. Grant taught them all to ride, just as he had taught their parents, passing on the skills and values that had shaped his life. When Grant was 60, his body began to slow down in ways that could not be ignored. His knees ached in cold weather, his back protested after long days. He finally accepted that it was time to fully hand over the day-to-day operations to young Thomas and the others. It was hard, stepping back from the work that had defined so much of his life, but he found new purpose in being a grandfather, in being there for the next generation. Madeline had her own struggles, a bout of pneumonia that terrified them all, but she recovered, though it left her more fragile than before. They began to talk about the future, about what would happen when one of them was gone. It was a hard conversation, but a necessary one. "I want you to promise me something," Madeline said one evening. "If I go first, I want you to keep living. Really living, not just existing. Spend time with the children and grandchildren, maybe even find someone else eventually." "Madeline, I could never." "You could," she interrupted. "And I would want you to. You have so much love to give, Grant. Do not let it die with me." He made the promise, though he could not imagine ever loving anyone else the way he loved her. But as it turned out, he did not have to worry about it. Grant passed away in his sleep at the age of 68, his heart simply giving out after a lifetime of hard work. Madeline was beside him when it happened, and she said later that his last words were, "I love you." The funeral was the largest the county had ever seen. Ranchers from across Montana and Idaho came. Men Grant had mentored, families he had helped, friends and neighbors and distant relations. They filled the church and spilled out into the yard, all there to pay their respects to a man who had lived with honor and integrity. Madeline stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said goodbye to the love of her life. But she did not crumble. Grant had made her strong, had believed in her strength from the very beginning. She would honor him by living well, by continuing to be part of the ranch and the family they had built together. She lived another 12 years, remaining sharp and engaged until the very end. She saw all of her grandchildren grow up, saw several of her great-grandchildren born. She continued to manage the household, to advise on ranch decisions, to be the heart of the family. When she finally passed away at the age of 79, it was peacefully, surrounded by family. Her last words were about Grant, about how she would see him soon, how she had missed him every day but had honored his memory by living fully. They buried her next to Grant on the hill overlooking the ranch, the spot where they had spent so many evenings watching the sunset. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names and the inscription, "Together in life, together in death, together forever." The ranch continued to thrive under the management of their children and grandchildren, a testament to the foundation Grant and Madeline had built. The values they had instilled, the love they had demonstrated, the example they had set, all of it lived on in the generations that followed. Young Thomas, now old Thomas himself, would sometimes take his own grandchildren up to the hill where Grant and Madeline were buried. He would tell them the story of how his parents had met, how his father had been just a poor ranch hand who fell in love with his mother, the owner's sister. He would tell them how Grant had fought to prove himself worthy, how he had never given up, how love and hard work had built everything they now enjoyed. "Your great-grandfather used to say that a man is not measured by where he starts, but by where he goes," Thomas would tell the children. He started with nothing but a horse and a dream, and he built all of this not for himself, but for the people he loved. That is the legacy he left us. Not just land and cattle, but the understanding that love and determination can overcome any obstacle. The sun would be setting by then, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the same colors that had painted so many of Grant and Madeline's evenings together. And standing there on that hill, with the ranch spreading out below and the mountains rising in the distance, it was easy to feel their presence, to sense that somehow, somewhere, they were still together, still watching over the family and the land they had loved so much. Grant Brennan had started as a ranch hand with nothing, a young man who loved a woman he thought was beyond his reach. But he had proven himself, had built a life and a legacy that would last for generations. He had shown that worth is not determined by birth or wealth, but by character and love. And in doing so, he had written a love story for the ages, one that would be told and retold by his descendants, a reminder that the most powerful force in the world is not money or power, but the determination of a heart that refuses to give up on love. The ranch still stands today, more than a century after Grant and Madeline first built their life there. It has been modernized, of course, adapted to new times and new ways. But in the main house, there is a room dedicated to Grant and Madeline, filled with photographs and letters, tools and mementos. Visitors can see the spyglass Grant used on that cattle drive, the book Madeline was reading the day he first spoke to her, the simple gold wedding bands they wore for 50 years. And on the wall, in a place of honor, is a framed piece of paper. It is the original partnership agreement between Grant and William Porter, yellowed with age but still legible. Next to it is a letter from Thomas Grayson, giving his blessing for Grant to marry Madeline. These documents, more than anything else, tell the story of how love can change everything, how one man's determination to prove himself worthy can build something that lasts forever. The sun sets over the Montana ranch every evening, just as it has for over 100 years. The cattle low in the distance, horses whinny in the corrals, and somewhere, in the whisper of the wind and the rustle of the grass, you can almost hear the echo of a promise made long ago. "I will prove I am good enough for you." Grant Brennan kept that promise, and in doing so, he gave the world a love story that would never be forgotten.